Clifford Geertz's theory of self. Clifford Geertz is most famous for his work on culture and meaning, but one of the more subtle and interesting parts of his thinking is how he saw the concept of the self. While Geertz did not write a specific theory of the self in the way some psychologists or philosophers did, his ideas about culture, symbols, and interpretation give us a powerful way to understand what makes us who we are. In Geertz's view, the self is not something that exists deep inside us, separate from the world. Instead, it is something shaped by the culture we are born into, the symbols we learn, and the roles we play in society. To understand Geertz's theory of the self, we need to go back to his central belief that humans are symbolic creatures. We live in a world full of meanings we learn through language, rituals, religion, customs, and shared practices. For Geertz, people are like spiders spinning webs of meaning, and culture is the web we live in. But unlike a spider that follows instinct, we do not just make these webs automatically. We create them, we learn them from others, and we constantly change them. The self, then, is not a fixed thing we are born with. It is more like a product of our social and cultural surroundings. In other words, who we are depends a lot on where we are and what kind of culture we live in. A child growing up in a small village in Indonesia might develop a very different sense of self than a child growing up in a large city in the United States. That is because each culture teaches people different values, different ways of thinking, and different expectations for how to behave. Geertz believed that we cannot understand the self by looking only at the individual. We must also look at the culture that gives that person their tools for understanding themselves. One of the best examples of this idea can be seen in how different societies think about individuality. In Western cultures, people often see the self as something inside each person, something private, personal, and separate from others. Being true to yourself, expressing your personality, and following your own dreams are seen as important goals. But in many other cultures, the self is understood more in terms of relationships and community. Being a good family member, following social rules, and maintaining harmony are more important than standing out. Geertz pointed out that there is no single correct way to think about the self. Every society creates its own picture of what a person should be, and people grow up learning to see themselves through that picture. Geertz explained that these cultural pictures of the self are not just ideas people carry in their heads. They are lived out through daily life, through rituals, roles, stories, and shared beliefs. For example, in a traditional religious community, a person might understand themselves mainly in terms of their role in the faith. Their identity might come from being a believer, a member of a congregation, or someone devoted to spiritual duties. In a modern capitalist society, on the other hand, a person might define themselves more in terms of their career, their achievements, or their personal goals. The way people describe who they are is deeply shaped by the culture they live in. This is why Geertz believed that we should not think of the self as a natural or universal thing. Instead, it is a social and cultural creation. Just as language varies from place to place, so does the sense of self. The words people use to describe emotions, relationships, duties, and goals can be very different across cultures, and these differences affect how people understand themselves and others. Geertz's idea of the self also helps us understand why people sometimes struggle when they move from one culture to another. Imagine someone who grows up in a culture where being humble and quiet is considered a virtue, and then moves to a place where being bold and assertive is more valued. That person might feel confused or out of place, not because they have the wrong kind of self, but because the rules for being a person have suddenly changed. This is why cultural understanding is so important, not only to respect others, but also to understand how deeply our own sense of self is shaped by the culture we live in. In his work, Geertz also explored how people use stories and symbols to create a sense of identity. He believed that people understand themselves through the roles they play in the stories their culture tells. For example, some cultures have myths or historical tales that give people a sense of belonging and purpose. Religion, too, often provides a story that helps people understand who they are, where they come from, and what their life means. These stories are not just entertainment, they are part of the cultural fabric that shapes the self. Geertz's approach to the self is different from those who try to find one fixed truth about human nature. He did not believe there was one way all people are meant to be. Instead, he saw human beings as flexible, creative, and deeply shaped by their surroundings. Ourselves are not built in isolation, they are built in interaction with family, with community, with rituals, and with culture. One of Geertz's most powerful contributions is his reminder that we should always try to see people in context. When we see someone behaving in a way that seems strange or unfamiliar, it might not make sense to us at first. But if we understand their culture, their values, and the symbols they live by, we may start to understand why they act the way they do. This is just as true for understanding ourselves. Sometimes, we feel things or make choices that we cannot fully explain. By looking at the culture around us, we might learn where those feelings and choices come from. In conclusion, Clifford Geertz's theory of the self is deeply connected to his idea that culture is a web of meaning. The self is not a separate object hiding inside us, but something shaped by the culture we live in. It is a pattern of beliefs, behaviors, symbols, and stories that help us understand who we are and how we relate to others. Geertz's work encourages us to be more thoughtful, more curious, and more respectful of the many different ways people build their sense of self. If you enjoyed this video and would like to keep learning more about important thinkers, theories, and ideas that shape our world, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you easy-to-understand content on big ideas. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you in the next video.